Have you ever wondered about the figures who walk onto the stage of history for a fleeting moment, only to vanish, leaving behind a mystery so profound, it echoes for thousands of years in the vast tapestry of the Bible? There are kings, prophets, and warriors whose stories span entire books. But then there is another, a man who appears in just 3 short verses, a priest king who steps out of the shadows, blesses the father of faith, and then disappears without a trace. His name is Melchizedek. He has no recorded father, no mother, no genealogy, no beginning of days, and no end of life. Who was this man? How could he hold a position so high that even Abraham, the patriarch of a chosen people, bowed before him and offered him a tithe? What kind of priesthood did he represent that was greater than the one God would later establish through an entire nation? And what if I told you that this brief encounter was not a historical footnote, but a divine signpost, a living prophecy, pointing toward a truth so central to our faith that without it, everything unravels? If this mystery already stirs your spirit, comment 777 below to declare that you are ready to gather away, seek the hidden truths of the prosins word. And to those who have become part of this community, your support, your comments, your very presence helps us continue this sacred work of uncovering what has been forgotten. May you be blessed for being a part of this journey. Now listen closely. The story of Melchizedek is not just about an ancient priest. It's about the very nature of God's plan for salvation. It's a riddle that winds through the Old Testament and finds its shocking answer in the New. It challenges everything we think we know about priesthood, about covenant, and about the one who was to come. How could this forgotten king be the key to understanding the eternal high priest of our souls? Stay with us until the very end, because the truth about Melchizedek is not just a theological puzzle. It is a revelation of a priesthood that is eternal, unchanging, and still active for you today. Are you ready to meet the King of Righteousness, the King of Peace, and the Priest of Peaceada, the Most High God? Let's begin the shocking truth about Melchizedek, the mysterious priest greater than Abraham himself in the ancient world, before empires had cemented their borders, and before the law was etched in stone. The land of Canaan was a volatile tapestry of city-states and tribal territories. It was a world where alliances were as fragile as pottery, and where strength was the only law that commanded respect. In this precarious landscape lived a man named Abraham, not yet the father of a multitude, but a sojourner, a man of faith, following a promise from a God most of his neighbors did not know. He lived with his family and his nephew Lot in a land that was promised but not yet possessed. It was a time of quiet, waiting a season of faith, being tested in the stillness of the desert. But that peace was about to be shattered from the east. A storm was gathering. 4 powerful kings from the region of Mesopotamia, led by a fiercely formidable ruler named Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, forged a mighty coalition. They were not minor chieftains. They were the rulers of burgeoning empires, and for 12 long years they had held dominion over the cities of the Jordan Valley, including the infamous cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, where Abram's nephew Lot had chosen to make his home. But in the 13th year the cities rebelled. They refused to pay tribute. They declared their independence, and in doing so they awakened a sleeping giant. The 4 kings of the east did not take this defiance lightly. They amassed their armies and swept westward like a flood of vengeance. They were a military machine, disciplined and ruthless, and they carved a path of destruction through the lands east of the Jordan. They conquered giants and warriors. Tribes that had stood for generations crumbled before them. Their march was relentless. Their victory seemingly assured. They were not just coming to punish. They were coming to reassert their absolute power and to plunder everything in their path. The news of their advance would have sent waves of terror through Canaan. Can you imagine the fear that must have gripped the people? The stories spreading from one village to the next of an unstoppable army, an alliance of 4 kings swallowing everything in its path. This was the world Abram lived, in a world where even the strongest could be swept away in a moment, and at the heart Of this conflict was Lot, who had settled in the fertile plains near Sodom, a place of comfort and prosperity, but also a place of great spiritual and now physical danger. The local kings of the valley, including the king of Sodom, marshaled their own forces to meet the invaders in the valley of Siddim, a place riddled with tar pits, a treacherous battlefield. But their courage was no match. For the Eastern war machine, the battle was a rout. The armies of Sodom and Gomorrah were shattered, and the survivors fled into the mountains, leaving their cities defenseless. The victorious kings of the East swarmed into Sodom and Gomorrah. They took everything, all the goods, all the food, and all the people they could find to carry away as captives, and among them, lost in the chaos and terror, was Lot, Abram's nephew. Along with his family and all his possessions, he was now a prisoner of war, a casualty of a conflict far bigger than himself, the promise of God. To Abram felt 1,000,000 miles away. In that moment, a fugitive from the battle, a lone survivor managed to escape the carnage and found his way to Abram, who was living by the great trees of Mamre. The news he delivered was a dagger to a fortis Mamre. Abram's heart. Lot is gone, taken captive by the Eastern kings. Now put yourself in Abram's shoes. Your kinsman, your nephew, who grew up with you, is in the hands of a merciless army, an army that just crushed a coalition of 5 kings. What could one man do? What hope was there against such overwhelming power? This was a test not of might, but of faith and loyalty. Would Abram shrink back in fear, or would he rise to the occasion, trusting in the God who had called him out of obscurity? The answer he gave would not only determine Lot's fate, but would set the stage for one of the most mysterious and significant encounters in all of sacred history. Stay with this story, because what happens next is more than a battle. It is a divine intervention that reveals a priest and a king, unlike any other the world had ever seen. Upon hearing the news of Lot's capture, something shifted within Abram. It was not the slow calculation of a military strategist, nor the hesitation of a man weighing the odds. It was the swift, decisive action of a patriarch, a leader whose loyalty was as fierce as his faith. He did not send messengers to negotiate. He did not appeal to neighboring kings for aid. He acted immediately with what he had. The Bible tells us in Genesis 14:14 that when Abram heard his relative had been taken captive, he called out the 318 trained men born in his household. Think about that for a moment. This was not a professional army. These were his servants, shepherds, farmhands, men who were loyal to him and his household. But they were not seasoned soldiers. They were facing a confederation of 4 victorious armies that had just laid waste to an entire region by any human standard. This was a suicide mission. It was a single household against an empire. But Abram was not relying on human standards. His trust was in a higher power, a God who had promised to make him a great nation, a God who had declared, "I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse." This raid on his family was a curse upon his house, and Abram was about to call upon the promise of his God with 318 men. Abram set off in pursuit of the eastern kings. He pursued them all, the way to Dan in the northern reaches of Canaan. Under the cover of darkness, he employed a strategy born of divine wisdom rather than a frontal assault. He divided his men and attacked from multiple sides at night, creating the illusion of a much larger force. The eastern armies, caught by surprise, victorious and complacent, were thrown into chaos and confusion. They broke ranks and fled, and Abram pursued them relentlessly beyond Damascus. He didn't just scatter them, he defeated them. He shattered the unbeatable coalition and recovered everything they had stolen, all the goods, all the people, and most importantly, he brought back his nephew Lot, safe and sound. This was not just a victory, it was a miracle, a stunning testament to the power of God working through a faithful servant. Abram's return was triumphant. He had faced down an imperial force and won. He had demonstrated that the covenant of God was not an abstract promise, but a shield and a sword in the covenant of God. Real world. As he journeyed back south through the King's Valley, a place that would later be near Jerusalem, two figures emerged from the landscape to meet him. This is the pivotal moment, the encounter that has puzzled scholars and, quote, inspired believers for millennia. The first was Bera, the king of Sodom, the very same king who had fled the battlefield and lost his city. He came out to greet Abram, likely with a mixture of shame, gratitude, and political opportunism. He represented the world's system of power, a kingdom built on earthly wealth and moral compromise. He was coming to make a deal to negotiate the spoils of a victory. He had no part in winning. But then another figure appeared, a man whose presence immediately changed the spiritual atmosphere. He was not coming to negotiate or to claim a share of the plunder. He was coming to bless. His name was Melchizedek, king of Salem, and he was the priest of God Most High in that valley too. Kingdoms met, two priesthoods collided, and two destinies intersected. One king offered a worldly deal, the other offered a divine blessing. One represented the fleeting power of man, the other, the eternal authority of God and Abram, the blessing. Victorious patriarch stood between them, faced with a choice that would reveal the true allegiance of his heart. The king of Sodom was a familiar figure, a man of this world. But Melchizedek, he was something else entirely. Where did he come? From who was this priest-king, who served the same God as Abram, yet stood outside the promised lineage? His appearance was sudden, profound, and pregnant with a mystery that was just beginning to unfold. The arrival of Melchizedek in the King's Valley is one of the most startling and significant moments in the book of Genesis. He doesn't emerge from a known lineage or a recognized city of faith. He simply appears fully formed in his authority as both king and priest at a crucial moment in Abram's journey, and the first thing he does is an act of profound spiritual significance as recorded in Genesis 14:18. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High. Stop and consider the weight of this action. Abram and his men are returning from a fierce battle. They are weary, hungry, and have just witnessed the hand of God deliver them from an overwhelming force. The king of Sodom, a worldly ruler, would likely offer congratulations or perhaps a political alliance. He would see the event through the lens of power and profit. But Melchizedek sees it through a spiritual lens. He doesn't offer a treaty, he offers sustenance. He brings bread and wine. This was not a common offering in the pagan rituals of Canaan. They offered animal sacrifices, sometimes even human sacrifices, to appease their violent deities. But bread and wine, this was an offering of fellowship, of life, of nourishment. It was an act of a priest who understood that the true God is not one who demands blood to be pacified, but one who gives life to be shared. This simple act of bringing out bread and wine is a stunning foreshadowing, a prophetic echo that reverberates all the way to a dimly lit upper room in Jerusalem 2,000 years later, where another priest and king would take bread and wine and declare, "This is my body, this is my blood." Melchizedek's offering was a physical meal, but it was also a spiritual sacrament, a sign of a priesthood that was not about appeasement, but about to communion with the Most High God. It was a priesthood that understood grace and provision, not just law and sacrifice. Can you see the layers of meaning here? In the middle of a war-torn land, a mysterious priest performs a ritual that will become the central act of worship for a faith that has not yet been fully born. He was demonstrating a different kind of spiritual economy, one based on receiving God's goodness, not earning his favor. And Abram, the man of faith, immediately recognized the significance of this act. He accepted the offering not as a handout from a foreign king, but as a ministry from a true priest of God. But the offering was only the beginning. Melchizedek's actions were followed by words of even greater power, words that would solidify his position as a figure of immense spiritual authority. He didn't just feed Abram, he blessed him. This simple act of blessing is the key to understanding the entire encounter. In the spiritual hierarchy, the one who has the authority to bless is always the greater. The one receiving the blessing is the lesser. Melchizedek, a king from a city called Salem, whose name means peace, stepped forward and pronounced a blessing, not from himself but from the God he served. "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth," he declared in Genesis 14:19. His blessing accomplished two things. First, it affirmed Abram's special status. It acknowledged that Abram was the one being blessed by the Creator of all things. This wasn't a generic good wish, it was a specific pronouncement of divine favor upon the man who held the covenant promise. Second, it revealed the identity of the God. Melchizedek served El Elyon, God Most High, the Creator of heaven and earth. This was not some local deity or tribal god. This was the universal sovereign, the one true God. Over all creation, this priest-king knew the same God that Abram knew, and he understood God's supreme authority over everything. Then Melchizedek did something else. He blessed God himself, saying, "And praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand." Genesis 14:20. In this second blessing, Melchizedek correctly identified the source of Abram's victory. It wasn't Abram's strategy or the strength of his 318 men. It was God Most High who had delivered the enemy into his hand. He gave all the glory for the military victory to God, stripping away any pride Abram might have felt and refocusing the entire event on the divine power that had made it possible. This priest was not just a man of ritual, he was a man of profound theological insight. He understood God's sovereignty, and he understood grace. Abram's response to this encounter is just as revealing. The Bible tells us, 1. Then Abram gave him a tenth of everything. This act of tithing, of giving a tenth of all the spoils of war to Melchizedek, was a voluntary act of worship and submission. Abram, the great patriarch, the friend of God, the father of the faithful, willingly and without being asked, submitted to himself to the priesthood of this mysterious king. By giving the tithe, Abram acknowledged Melchizedek's superior spiritual rank. He recognized that this man was a legitimate representative of the Most High God, and that his priesthood was worthy of honor and support. This is the heart of the mystery. How could there be a priest greater than Abram, the one from whom the entire Levitical priesthood would eventually spring? The author of the book of Hebrews would later seize on this very point to make a revolutionary argument about a new and better priesthood. The fact that Abram paid tithes to Melchizedek and received a blessing from him proved that Melchizedek's priesthood was superior in that moment. Two kings stood before Abram, the king of Sodom, with his worldly offer, and Melchizedek with his divine blessing. Abram's choice would define him. He rejected the wealth of Sodom, refusing to be made rich by a corrupt king. But he embraced the ministry of Melchizedek, aligning himself with a heavenly kingdom, not an earthly one. He chose the spiritual over the material, the eternal over the temporary, and in that choice he affirmed the greatness of the mysterious priest-king of Salem. Who was this man who commanded such reverence, whose authority was so self-evident that even the father of faith bowed before him? His name and title held the first clues to his identity: Melchizedek, a name that is not just a label but a profound declaration in ancient Hebrew. Melech means king, and Tzedek means righteousness. So his very name translates to King of Righteousness. This was not a title he earned or a name given in flattery. It was the essence of his being and his rule. He was the embodiment of divine justice and moral perfection. In a world filled with corrupt and violent rulers, here was a king whose reign was defined by righteousness, but his identity was twofold. He was not just a king, he was the king of a specific place. Salem, the ancient name for the city that would one day become Jerusalem, and the name Salem is derived from the Hebrew word shalom, which means peace. He was the king of righteousness ruling from the city of peace. What a stunning combination in a world marked by endless conflict and injustice here. was a ruler whose very existence pointed to a different kind of kingdom, one founded on righteousness, and whose result was peace. This duality of king and priest in one person was highly unusual in the ancient world. Typically, these roles were separate. The king wielded political and military power, while the priest held spiritual authority, but Melchizedek held both offices simultaneously. He was a royal priest, a holy king, a figure who seamlessly integrated the governance of a city with the worship of the Most High God. This fusion of roles was a powerful symbol, a pre-echo of the one who would one day be prophesied to sit on David's throne as both the ultimate king and the ultimate high priest. The mystery deepens when we consider his priesthood. He is called Priest of God Most High. El Elyon, this title for God, is significant. It emphasizes God's supreme sovereignty over all other powers, both earthly and spiritual. Melchizedek was not the priest of a tribal deity. He was the priest of the Creator of heaven and earth, the universal God. This means that long before the covenant with Israel, long before the establishment of the Levitical priesthood at Mount Sinai, there existed a holy order of priests who served the one true God, and Melchizedek was its chief representative. His priesthood predates the Aaronic one. It is more ancient, more universal, and as the book of Hebrews will later argue, more powerful, but the most baffling aspect of his identity is what the Bible doesn't say about him. Genesis gives genealogies for almost every significant figure. Adam, Noah, Abraham. Their lineage is carefully traced to establish their place in God's redemptive plan. But Melchizedek has no recorded genealogy. He has no father, no mother, no list of ancestors. He has no recorded birth and no recorded death. He steps onto the page of Scripture as if from eternity and vanishes back into it. This deliberate silence is not a historical oversight. It is a theological statement. The author of Hebrews in the New Testament would later explain that this lack of a recorded beginning or end was intentional, designed to make him a type, a symbol of the Son of God whose existence is eternal. He remains a priest forever. The Bible presents him as a timeless figure, a priest whose authority is not derived from his bloodline, as was the case with the Levitical priests, but from his very being. His priesthood is not temporary or inherited. It is perpetual and inherent. So who was he? Really, scholars and theologians have proposed several theories over the centuries. One theory suggests he was a righteous human king, a descendant of Shem, Noah's son, who preserved the pure worship of God in a pagan land. According to this view, he was a historical figure, a literal king of the Jebusite city of Salem who maintained the faith of his ancestors in a world that had largely fallen into idolatry. This would make him a remarkable but ultimately mortal man, shining example of faith outside the direct line of Abraham. Another more dramatic theory proposes that Melchizedek was not a mere man, but a theophany, or more specifically, a Christophany, an appearance of the pre-incarnate Son of God. This would explain his lack of genealogy, his eternal nature, and his clear superiority to Abraham if he was Christ himself. Then, of course, Abraham would pay him tithes and receive his blessing. This view sees the encounter not as a meeting between two men, but as a meeting between a faithful servant and his eternal Lord, regardless of his precise identity. His purpose in the narrative is clear. He appears as a standard of a higher divine order, a priesthood and a kingdom that transcends the temporary structures of this world. He is a living prophecy, a mysterious signpost, pointing to a greater reality, a greater king of righteousness and peace, and a greater high priest, who would one day bring a final and perfect offering for all humanity. His brief appearance was a seed planted in the soil of history, destined to lie dormant for 1,000 years before sprouting again in the songs of a king after his fleeting yet monumental appearance in Genesis. Melchizedek vanishes from the biblical narrative as mysteriously as he arrived for a full millennium. His name is not mentioned again. Patriarchs came and went. Israel was born as a nation. They were enslaved in Egypt, delivered by mighty acts of God. They wandered in the wilderness, received the law at Sinai, and established a priesthood based entirely on the lineage of Aaron and the tribe of Levi. This Levitical priesthood became the bedrock of Israel's worship system. It was detailed and intricate with laws governing every sacrifice, every offering, every festival. It was a priesthood of blood and fire, of incense and ritual, and it was entirely dependent on genealogy to be a priest. You had to be a son of Aaron, period. There was no other way. It seemed as though the ancient memory of a different kind of priest, a universal priest-king from Salem, had been completely forgotten, overwritten by the new covenant God had established with Israel. But God does not forget. In the golden age of Israel's monarchy, 1,000 years after Abram met Melchizedek in the King's Valley, another king, a man after God's own heart, sat on the throne in that very same city of Salem now, called Jerusalem. His name was David, and he was not only a king and a warrior, but also a prophet, a man to whom God revealed deep mysteries about the future in the midst of his reign. David penned a psalm, a song of worship and prophecy that is one of the most quoted Old Testament passages in the New. It is Psalm 110. In this short yet incredibly dense psalm, David receives a divine revelation, an oracle from God concerning a future ruler, a Lord who is greater than David himself. David writes, "The Lord says to my Lord, 'Sit at my right hand, until I make your enemies a footstool for your scepter.'" Psalm 110. 1. David is overhearing a conversation within the Godhead where God the Father invites God the Son to sit in the place of ultimate authority. This future king would not just be a human descendant, he would be divine. But then the prophecy takes an unexpected turn in verse 4. David records a solemn vow made by God himself. "The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." Suddenly, after 1,000 years of silence, the name Melchizedek explodes back into the story, and it does so in a way that would have been shocking to anyone. Living under the law of Moses, David prophesies that the coming Messiah, the ultimate king, will not be a priest from the line of Aaron. He will not be a Levitical priest at all. His priesthood will belong to a different order, a higher order, an Ariae et Eslad, eternal order. The order of Melchizedek. Why is this so revolutionary? Because it declares that the Levitical priesthood, the entire sacrificial system established at Sinai, was never intended to be permanent. It was a placeholder, a shadow, pointing to a greater reality. The Messiah's priesthood would not be based on who his father was. It would be based on a direct divine appointment, an unbreakable oath from God himself. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. This priesthood would be forever. It would not end with death as the Levitical priesthood did. It would be perpetual, eternal, just like Melchizedek himself, who had no recorded beginning of days or end of life. This prophecy in Psalm 110 is the bridge that connects the historical event in Genesis to its ultimate fulfillment in the New Testament. It takes Melchizedek from being a mysterious historical figure and transforms him into a prophetic type of the Messiah himself. It establishes that God's plan for a perfect priesthood existed long before the law and would be fulfilled long after the law's purpose was complete. It posed a profound question to the people of Israel. If the Messiah was to be a priest in the order of Melchizedek, what did that mean for the temple, for the sacrifices, for the entire Aaronic order? It was a hint that God was planning to do something new, something that would supersede the old covenant and establish a direct, unchanging access to his presence through a new and better high priest. The seeds of this mystery, planted in Genesis and watered in the Psalms, would finally come to full bloom in the rich theological soil of the book of Hebrews, where the full shocking truth about Melchizedek would finally be revealed. For centuries, the riddle of Melchizedek lingered in the background of Jewish thought. He was a king greater than Abraham, a priest from a mysterious order, prophesied by David, but his full significance remained veiled. It wasn't until the author of the New Testament book of Hebrews took up his pen that the veil was finally torn away in a masterful and sustained argument. Primarily in chapters 5 through 7, the author unlocks the mystery of Melchizedek not as a historical curiosity, but as the central proof of the superiority and finality of the Messiah's work. He argues that the Son of God is the great high priest, not in the lineage of Aaron, but in the eternal order of Melchizedek. The author begins by establishing the two qualifications for a high priest. He must be chosen from among men to represent them before God, and he must be able to deal gently with the ignorant and wayward, because he himself is subject to weakness. The Son of God perfectly fulfills this by becoming human, taking on flesh and blood, and being tempted in every way we are yet without sin. But then the author addresses the appointment. How does one become a high priest? He states, "No one takes this honor on himself, but he must be called by God just as Aaron was." Hebrews 5:4. The Aaronic priests were called by lineage. The Son of God, however, was called by a direct divine decree, quoting Psalm 2, "You are my son, today I have become your father," and then quoting Psalm 110, "You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." This establishes that the Messiah's priesthood is not self-appointed, it is divinely ordained by an eternal oath. But why this order? Why Melchizedek? This is where the author dives deep into the Genesis account. He systematically breaks down the encounter between Melchizedek and Abraham to prove the superiority of this ancient priesthood. First, he considers the meaning of the name and title. First, the name. Melchizedek means king of righteousness, then also king of Salem means king of peace. Hebrews 7:2. The Messiah's work is precisely this, to establish a kingdom of perfect righteousness, which results in perfect peace. This is something the Levitical priesthood could never accomplish. Then comes the most startling verse of all. Hebrews 7:3. Without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. The author is not arguing that Melchizedek was a divine being who literally had no parents. Rather, he is making a theological point from the silence of the Genesis record. The Holy Spirit intentionally omitted his genealogy to make him a type, a divinely designed symbol of the Son of God. The Levitical priesthood was defined by its genealogy. You were a priest only because your father was, and your service ended with your death. But Melchizedek's priesthood in the scriptural record is timeless. It has no beginning and no end, making it the perfect picture of the eternal priesthood of the Son of God. The author then presents his primary proof of superiority, the tithe. Just think how great he was, the author exclaims in Hebrews 7:4. Even the patriarch Abraham gave him a tenth of the plunder. The Levites received tithes from their fellow Israelites, but here is Abraham, the father of the entire nation, including the tribe of Levi, giving a tithe to an outsider. The conclusion is inescapable, and without doubt the lesser is blessed by the greater. Hebrews 7:7. Abraham, who held the promises, who was the friend of God, acknowledged Melchizedek's greater rank. If Abraham is lesser than Melchizedek, then his descendants, including the entire Levitical priesthood, are also lesser than the broad priesthood of Melchizedek. This was a bombshell argument. It dismantled the perceived finality of the Aaronic system from within the scriptures themselves by proving Melchizedek's superiority. The author proves that God had always planned for a priesthood that was greater, more perfect, and more permanent than the one he gave to Israel at Sinai. That system, with its endless animal sacrifices, was a temporary tutor, a shadow pointing forward to the substance that would be revealed in the Messiah, the great high priest, in the order of Melchizedek, a priest who did not need to offer sacrifices for his own sin, and who offered himself once for all as the perfect and final sacrifice for the sins of the world. The Rostis mystery of Melchizedek was solved. He was the divine preview, the living trailer for the main event of human history. His appearance to Abraham was God's way of embedding a secret code into the story, a prophecy that would one day unlock The truth of a new and better covenant established on better promises. The argument laid out in the book of Hebrews about the superiority of Melchizedek's priesthood is not merely a theological exercise, it is the very foundation for the believer's confidence and access to God. The author demonstrates that the old system under the Levitical priesthood was ultimately flawed and incomplete, not because of a failure in God's design, but because it was never intended to be the final destination. It was a shadow, a symbol, a placeholder, pointing to a greater reality that was to come. The author of Hebrews asks a piercing question in chapter 7, verse 11. If perfection could have been attained through the Levitical priesthood, and indeed the law was given to the people under that priesthood, why was there still need for another priest to come, one in the order of Melchizedek, not in the order of Aaron? This question cuts to the heart of the matter. The law and the sacrificial system it commanded could make people ceremonially clean, but it could not perfect the conscience. It could cover sin for a time, but it could not remove it permanently. The endless cycle of animal sacrifices was a constant reminder of sin's presence, not its absence. It was a system based on repetition, and it was administered by priests who were themselves mortal, sinful, and imperfect. They had to offer sacrifices for their own sins before they could even offer them for the people, and their priesthood ended the moment they died. But the priesthood of the order of Melchizedek is superior in every conceivable way. First, it is based on a divine oath, not on lineage. Hebrews 7:20-21 points out that the Levitical priests were made without an oath, but the Messiah was made a priest with an oath when God declared, "The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever." An oath from God is unbreakable and eternal, making this priesthood infinitely more secure than one based on the fragility of human descent. Second, this priesthood is eternal and unchanging, because its priest is eternal. Hebrews 7:23-25 explains. Now there have been many of those priests since death prevented them from continuing in office, but because the Son of God lives forever, he has a permanent priesthood. Therefore he is able to save completely those who come to God through him, because he always lives to intercede for them. The Levitical priests died and needed to be replaced. The great high priest in the order of Melchizedek lives forever, and therefore his work of Thash's intercession for his people never ceases. He is always on the job, always representing us before the Father. This provides a level of security and hope the old system could never offer. Third, this high priest is perfect and sinless, unlike the priests of the Old Covenant who had to make sacrifices for their own failings. The Messiah was holy, blameless, pure, set apart from sinners, exalted above the heavens. Hebrews 7:26. Because he was sinless, he did not need to offer a sacrifice for himself. He was the perfect priest, able to offer the perfect sacrifice. Finally, the sacrifice he offered was not the blood of bulls and goats, which could never truly take away sin. It was the sacrifice of himself offered once for all time. Hebrews 7:27 says, "He sacrificed for their sins once for all when he offered himself." This single act accomplished what millions of animal sacrifices could never do. It dealt with sin completely, finally, and forever. It opened a new and living way directly into the presence of God. The veil in the temple, which separated a holy God from sinful humanity, was torn in two at the moment of his death, signifying that the way was now open for all who come to him in faith. So, Melchizedek is more than just a mysterious figure. He is the key that unlocks our understanding of this superior priesthood. He represents a priesthood that is universal, not limited to one nation, eternal, not limited by death, and effective, not a mere shadow of the real thing. His brief appearance to Abraham was a divine promise whispered at the dawn of redemptive history, a promise that one day a perfect high priest, a king of righteousness and a king of peace, would come and establish a new covenant that could truly bring us to God. As we draw this journey to a close, the figure of Melchizedek stands not as a confusing footnote, but as one of the most profound and elegantly designed prophecies in all of Scripture. He is the Alpha and Omega of priesthoods, appearing at the beginning of the covenant story with Abraham and finding his ultimate meaning in the final revelation of the Messiah's work. He was a man out of time, a king from a city of peace, a priest of the Most High God whose very existence was a sermon written by the finger of God into the fabric of history. What can we take away from this mysterious priest-king today? First, Melchizedek reminds us that God's plan of redemption is far older and far broader than we often imagine. Long before the law was given on Sinai, long before a single stone of the temple was laid, God had a priesthood that was universal and eternal. He was not the God of Israelites only, he was, and is the God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. His grace was active in the world through figures like Melchizedek, remnants of a true faith that had never been completely extinguished. This should expand our vision of God's work in the world. He is always moving in unexpected places and through unexpected people. Second, the story of Melchizedek is the ultimate proof that our salvation is secure in a perfect and eternal high priest. Our hope is not in a system of rules or rituals that we must perform. Our hope is in a person, the one who sits at the right hand of the Father, forever interceding for us as a priest in the order of Melchizedek. The Levitical priesthood, with its temporary priests and repeated sacrifices, has passed away. We now live under a new and better covenant, mediated by a high priest who has offered one perfect sacrifice for all time. This gives us incredible confidence to approach God not with confidence, fear, but with boldness, knowing that the way has been opened for us by our great high priest, third Melchizedek, as the King of righteousness and King of peace, shows us the nature of the kingdom our high priest brings. It is a kingdom first of righteousness, and then of peace, true peace. Shalom, that deep sense of wholeness and well-being, is not possible without righteousness. Without our relationship with God being made right through the work of our high priest, he does not offer a cheap peace that ignores sin. He offers a profound peace that is the fruit of his righteous sacrifice on our behalf. His kingdom is not of this world. It is a spiritual reality that we enter into by faith, a realm of righteousness, peace, and joy in the Holy Spirit. So who was Melchizedek? Was he a righteous Canaanite king, a descendant of Shem? Was he an angel, or was he the pre-incarnate Son of God himself? The Bible's deliberate ambiguity on this point may be the final lesson. While we may never know his exact identity on this side of eternity, we know his purpose. He was a divine signpost, a living shadow pointing to the substance that was to come. He was a divinely crafted type of the sense. One, he resembled the true eternal high priest and King Jesus the Messiah. His story invites us to look beyond the temporary and to fix our eyes on the eternal, on the unshakable priesthood and the unending kingdom of our Lord. Now I want to hear from you. What does the story of Melchizedek mean to you? Which theory about his identity resonates most with your spirit? With us understanding his role change the way you see the work of the Messiah? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Your insights are a valuable part of this community and help us all to grow in understanding. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into one of the Bible's greatest mysteries. If this exploration has blessed you or opened your eyes to a new truth, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more content that uncovers the profound truths written in the Bible. May you walk in the confidence of knowing you are represented by a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek, and may the peace that comes from his righteousness fill your heart today. God bless you.